You got Mark.
Hello. I'm eating a sandwich.
I can see you, hear you there, and Charles, good. I see our other Charles, Mr. Goyette, is here. Wanda, good evening.
How's everybody?
2 thumbs up.
I think Michael looks very happy because he believes it's his last meeting.
Woo! If you could see my desk in here, there are papers everywhere, so it's recycle time. Alfonso, okay, good evening. Mr. Carmona.
Hi,
And
good evening.
Len is with us, good. And we don't see Terry, but it is 6 o'clock. We do have a quorum. Unless there's any objection. Who else are we missing? Anybody I can see? I don't think so. All right, let's call the meeting to order. The City of Sunset Valley for July 30th is 6:01. We're on to our second item. Any citizen comments? All right.
I just wanted to share a small item under citizen comments. So we sent the worksheet, the bubble map, basically of how the funds were interrelated that the committee had asked for. We did put that in OpenGov as well. So Susanna, if you could, so there's the sheet that you guys got, and then below that, the circles become interactive. We are working on a little quirk on where it opens up. It says revenues in 2020, so it's picking up 1920 projected, but when you click on it, it takes you to the 2021 proposed. So Susanna, if you can scroll up. We embedded the proposed, I think you're frozen. Scroll up a little more. Yeah, we embedded the proposed budget that's in development. If you scroll up a little more. Right there in that first paragraph. I try to keep it very simple. Most of the emails that I'm getting, what kind of shell games do you guys playing down here? Where does it go? So I tried to keep it very simple, very sort of conversational. And the proposed budget for FY 2021, that's what you guys are working in. And we're calling it the budget that's in development, since it hasn't been moved from development to publication, and it won't for several more meetings actually. So I just wanted to let folks know that it's out there. And, I don't know how many times we've said you're welcome to go look at it, not to the committee, but to the residents. You're welcome to go look at it. You're welcome to have comments. So again, just one more pitch that it's out there.
What kind of traffic has there been into that? Can you monitor that traffic? Do we know what kind of?
We can. I just made it live about 30 minutes ago.
But I meant just in terms of looking. Oh, okay, you're right. So the budget won't be, okay. Will it be the mayor's budget that'll go live, or ours prior to? Mr. Cowan?
Yours prior to. I can run some analytics on the budget that's in development that we've been working on. I can run some analytics to see how many folks have jumped in it.
Michael?
Mr. Carmona?
Yeah, I think that is excellent. I saw that this morning. But now we can go inside. We can go now inside, Sylvia?
Yes.
Can you give it to us some steps from where we can go? So in that way, if we will go to the main page from the city, later how we will go inside. So
yes.
In that way, it will be easy for me.
Susanna, if you pull up the city's website, see right there, the very first line is budget development to date. That's what you guys are working on. And then
yes.
The budget explained takes you to that story that Susanna just had up. If you go back to that, Susanna, there you go. If you go back to that, if you go budget development to date, if you click on that one, That's where you guys are right now. So everything that you've worked on as you updated, these charts are live updates. So when Susanna makes a change, they light up. It is still in development. So in the background, when they click on it, it's going to say in development. It's not going to say it's a live or adopted budget yet.
Cool. I like it. Nicely done.
Yeah, excellent job, Sylvia?
Thank you.
Yeah,
Susanna's really doing all the hard work. I'm just adding text.
well, and to that comment of the shell game, and I get why people get to that point, but one of the things I like about those graphic is it shows those shells, right? Those are all the pods where the revenue comes and where it goes. And so it's really a nice visual and workflow in terms of where things come in and where they go out to. Yeah, it's a good visual.
Yeah, you can go to subsidies, and that will show you. Then we have 577,000, 33%. If she will go down, they will see that subsidies, and that is good for everybody.
Yeah, you really see that visual subsidies. You really see what portion of the pie that is and how much of a contribution we make out of.
You got it, Michael. Yeah, that would be easy for a lot of people, including myself.
Data on a page, right? The numbers, we see the numbers, but when you see this, you go, oh, okay. Well, that really
didn't realize that was that big of a pie slice.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all I have.
Cool. All right.
Goodbye, Susanna. Congratulations, Susanna.
Yeah, nice.
Yep. The only comment I would make
actually,
is that, oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say another OpenGov thing real quick is we were having a few issues with the per capita amount. So the population is interpolated, which we have no control over. We're currently fixing that. So the per capita numbers currently are incorrect.
Yeah. Mark?
The only other thing that I was going to say was having the actual numbers on the the portion of the pie graph is nice. Like, is that you can do percentages and numbers, or maybe like two different versions of it, just so you can see, what are the expenses, proposed expenses, like we do in the sales tax revenue, we see what those revenue numbers are, but the other charts, only show percentages. So it'd be kind of nice to have a version of it that shows percentages in one case and then numbers in another case possibly, or combining them both somehow.
Yeah. Yeah, it provides real clarity. And like I said, you can see all the different shells that people are talking about, right? That's how it's spread out in terms of crime fund, street fund, water protection, general sales tax revenue, drainage fund. It's a good visual. So thank you guys. I hope that helps folks, the citizens, get a better, more clear view of where things come from and where they go. Cool.
Yep.
All right.
Okay, Susanna, take it away. Don't forget to unpause your screen, Susanna. Oh, Charles Goyette has his hand up.
Mr. Goyette, you're muted. Charles, you're muted. Charles.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was trying to unmute Charles Young. Sorry, Charles.
It's still early. Come on.
Well, I didn't realize there were so many people that jumped on. I couldn't see myself up there. I had to scroll up. Anyway, feeble excuses. But hey, yeah, Susanna, you mentioned about the population number and the fact that looking at the data, it looks like we're losing population in droves. And and I talked to Susanna earlier about that and the fact that that number isn't even coming from us. It's being automatically imposed upon us by the tool itself, which I thought was interesting. But there was also some other discontinuities or just the way the data was showed up in the reports that seemingly had a personality of its own. I was just wondering, Susanna, if you're going to mention any of that, the differences we've seen, the possibility that, or the likelihood that it represents stale data maybe, or just some issues that haven't yet been resolved in terms of how OpenGov represents its information.
Yeah, the issue we were looking at earlier with changing the per capita. So if you're on OpenGov, here we go. In the reports, it was having a discontinuity between per capita amounts, and then when you added the account codes as well, it was giving different data here. So I've actually contacted OpenGov, and they've put in a support ticket to fix that.
And there was one other issue with regard to reports that represented old information that, that in the process of updating the information through through populating the data, it was fallacious. I mean, it no longer represented reality, right? And that I thought it seemed reasonable to me that that data wouldn't be lying around. If it's stale, it needs to go into the bucket because it just adds confusion. If if the tool presents two different sets of data, that's not a good thing.
Yeah, the one thing I really want to bring everyone's attention to is this updated date here. So this is the last time that this data was updated. So if there have been any changes to the data that we have, it hasn't been updated since that time. It's not a report that automatically does that. We have to go in and do it ourselves. So if there's this one, the FY21 budget report, which is what I think most people are probably be using right now, I go in and update that weekly. So right after all of the discussions that we have and all the changes we make in each of our meetings, I go through and update this the day after.
But should that old information be lying around? I mean, it seems like it's just opening up the opportunity for misinterpretation. I mean, it caught me off guard. I wasn't aware that I was looking at stale data, and it caused me some grief. I got some egg on my face.
Oops. I'm glad I've never done that.
I guess that question's not going to be answered. Okay, moving right along. I'm done.
All right. Thank you, Charles.
So Susanna, if I'm going to take the screen from you right quick, because I want to show the analytics so they can, the committee can see where we are, the information that the tool has available.
The school?
So screen sharing, share my screen.
What do you mean the school?
Well, it says, there you go, share my screen. It's waiting to share my screen. Well, it doesn't like me anymore. It likes Susanna much better.
Temperamental.
I'm the presenter. So let's see. Nope, it's not going to let me. Let me send this to you, Susanna, so you can bring it up. Yes.
Just real quick under citizen comments, and I guess this is kind of the general conversation area. There was some conversation about what the costs or expenses were per citizen, and I've been thinking about that, and I think I may have mentioned to the committee long back when TxDOT was talking about expanding the road out there, they used numbers like 40 and 45,000 daytime populations. So it's not just, I'm not sure if that's a fair equation to just say it's per citizen. I mean, I guess you could do that, but you have to take into account, right? Think about all the businesses and all the people that are driving through the city on the overpass and on the access roads at any given moment, what we're providing services to. And that has to have some impact on operation. So I think that's part to be not to be discounted, or just a clear X divided by, well, wait a minute, you know, we're not a little town that's off somewhere that doesn't have major shopping centers, sits on a major interstate. I think there is an impact to be felt by us, by our community, to police that, service it, and provide support for it. So something to think about. All right. We're
So
now on
there's
to the. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
there's the analytics on the screen. We've had 242 visitors, each spending an average of 7.5 minutes or so. Suzanne, if you scroll down, the top pages that they visited are there, and then there's other analytics that are available. And we can provide this to the committee as well.
Fascinating.
Okay, that's all I have.
Good. I'm glad people are going there.
Do we
That's
know,
cool.
pardon me, do we know if that's 242 unique visitors or same visitor visiting 242 times, or?
It will tell you who's unique and who's returning.
Okay, good.
Okay, any other questions for them? All right, guys, we'll move on to our third item is the review, discuss, and possible action on amending financial policy. It's FP 103 and discuss general fund financial guidelines for the city of Sunset Valley. I will turn this conversation over to Wanda.
Okay, thanks, Michael. There's a couple things I want us to consider. And if you go down next page under financial principles, under item number 2, can y'all go down to the next page? Item number 2, third bullet. It says maintain general government fund balance equal to 100% of budget revenue for the preceding fiscal year. So the way I interpret this is that our reserve requirement for next year, for the following year, will be in 21-22 will be about $4 million, because our budget is right around $4 million if we go at the bronze budget. And I think when this was written, we were always in a era where revenues were more constant. But with this, because we're budgeting about $1 million less, that means our reserve requirement could go down $1 million. So I am going to suggest that we say maintain general government fund balances equal to 100% of budget revenue for the average of the last 5 years. Thoughts?
For the average.
For the preceding 5 years. You take the average budgeted revenue, and then that becomes your reserve requirement. And the thought process behind that is that in bad years, your reserve doesn't just go down to nothing. And in good years, it doesn't climb to this huge number, but it's a slower moving average.
Yeah, it smooths out the volatility.
Right.
Yes.
Sylvia?
My first comment is that this is a guideline. It's not a rule.
It's our policy.
Policy.
Well, it's a principle, not an inviolable policy, because we change it, right? It goes up and down. This year, we're not following that precept, are we?
That's why we're changing it.
Well, but if next year you change it again because we have bad revenues or whatever, are you going to change the policy again?
Well, if we do the average of the last 5 years, it won't change a great deal. I am just concerned that our reserve might be $4 million. Sorry, John.
Yeah, that's true, but when the tide changes and we start building up reserves, are you going to hold down the balance because the policy says the average of 5 years, or are you going to allow it to grow more? I think it's a guideline, not a set in concrete kind of thing.
Well, with all due respect, it is a policy.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand what you're saying, John. It's a policy. It's adopted policy that the council asked us to follow as a guideline. So it's not a suggestion.
Well, just a comment. I think that we need to leave the reserve alone because if we provide more money, we'll just spend it. And I think now our concentration needs to be on the COVID and how much it's going to go down and not be changing things that we won't have any clue what our needs might be. But I think it's also, the second point is that it would appear that our cost of service is way beyond any other municipalities the size of ours. So why do we need to spend more money?
It looks like Charles Goyette has his hand raised.
All right, Charles and then Terry. Thank you, Dr. Brown.
Okay, I'm sorry, but I missed the full explanation of what Wanda was saying. So Wanda, could you tell me what number you were referring to on this sheet?
Yeah, so right now, so we're at number 2 in the 3rd bullet.
Okay.
So the issue here is that if we follow this policy, which I would expect any council to do that, that means in 21-22, our reserve only has to be $4 million.
Okay. Because of the fact that our budget has been drastically reduced.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. One more point that I'd like to make. I hear what John Belanca is saying about, what's saying policy or guideline. Those two terms mean something different to me. It says it's a guideline, but we're also, what we're talking tonight, that it's a policy. Which is it? Is it a guideline or is it a policy?
It's an adopted policy.
Okay.
It's in the, Suzanne, if you can go to the very front page. It's financial policy 103 embedded into the overall financial policy of the city that council adopts and amends periodically.
Okay. All right. So it should be stated as such, right? And I think the item that Wanda just explained, thank you for that explanation. It makes sense to me, but perhaps, a little bit more language needs to be added to this, to just to make that clear, right? Because I wouldn't have known that. I had that highlighted because had a question on it, but it's a good point, and I think it needs to be fleshed out maybe a little more. Thank you.
Can I make one more comment?
Hold on, John. Terry.
The words say should be. Almost all of them say this should be, it should be that, it should be. I'm sorry, that's not firm in concrete.
Mr. Cowan?
Yeah, I agree with John, and I'm glad to see what date that the council had the opportunity to take a look at these administrative procedures, and there are a lot of them. Also want to keep in mind this whole thing about per capita cost. There were some methodological issues in the blog that kind of introduced this to the public last week, and ETJ, if you just look at the people sitting in those apartment buildings, it nearly doubles the population of Sunset Valley. And they are using our roads, so they are part of the wear and tear on our infrastructure. And in terms of, I agree with John that this is a guideline, it's a target, but I don't think people would agree to keep a reserve level to admit cutting, say, their water and wastewater subsidies. That's not what the public would want, not what our citizens would want. So, so I agree with John.
Alfonso?
Well, I think this is a little difficult in this case, but I try to have this in my mind. So we were leaving some status of $5 million. That was our expenditures and revenues. But at this moment, we drop 20%. So we are in $4 million. I think that will be in function of the expenditures, how much money we need to have in reserves. If we will have more money in reserves, that give it to us more flexibility to spend that money. So this is more or less related to the long-range financial planning that at this moment we don't have. So we have to adjust. So in my opinion, the economy at this moment don't give it to us some line, a straight line. We don't know if that will go a little down for a while or how that will be. The only thing that we know is that for 4 or 5 years was a plateau. So the $5 million was constant and the expenditures, they were growing. So at this moment, we don't know. So if we have $4 million as reserves, that gave it to us a good idea how much money we need to spend next year. Because perhaps I don't believe that will be so high. So if we will say that we will have $5 million in reserve, how we will have that if we don't achieve that as a revenues? So it's try to look that in that way. So you need to go to the low point, and it's $4 million, and try to see that with the economy will give it to us a better direction, so we can adjust this. So to say 5 years, I think that at this moment we can say that we will check this next year, and in that way we will decide how we will be moving. This is my decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Alfonso. Charles?
Given that we will be in times of uncertainty for the foreseeable future, just throwing this out as a suggestion, could we say maintain the general government fund balance at least equal to 100% of budget revenue, with the discretion of the city council to set that number higher?
Higher?
The other thing that I would point out before we start deciding how much money we need in reserve, we need a better estimate of justification for the expenses that we have. I've never seen that. And it's things we pull out of the hat and then we pay for them. I think we need an analysis of whether or not, number one, we really need that, or if we need it to that extent, and or could it be served by some other method, such as a vendor contract or whatever. So we may be able to lower the budget substantially, but to just decide how much money we're going to spend before we've done any kind of analysis of justification of the expenses we're doing, whether you think Phil's deal was mythological or not, it's obvious we don't have much justification for where we are. If you start looking at repairs and maintenance and small tools and even big things, we don't know what that amounts to. Who's making the judgment? Do we take bids? You know, we don't have any of that information.
All good points. I think Wanda's point still is that we've got policy that we're operating with policy that doesn't reflect what we're going to do. And, you know, how do we want to get that policy more in line with what we're to do? I don't know what's going to happen next year, 2022. Don't have a clue what's going to go on there. But do we want to have a policy that's more flexible instead of this one's pretty rigid, right? And the way we're going to be in conflict with our policy.
Well, for the sake of moving forward, I would like to make a motion that we leave the reserve alone, suggest to the council that they take that line out, whether it's guideline or policy. It doesn't seem sensible to me. And then after we've done all the other evaluation, then we can come back and write a policy. But I think we're shadowboxing to change it.
So your motion is to withdraw that line out of the financial policy?
Yes. And put in there that it's the council decision or whatever you want to. I don't have a firm thought about that, but I just don't think it needs to be $4 million. That's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I don't think she was proposing $4 million, Dr. Browning. I think she was saying an average of 5 years.
Well, how much would that be?
It'd probably be close to 4.8 million. Right now, our reserve is 5.2. It would be probably just doing math in my head, about 5.85 or 4.8, 4.9 million.
Yeah, that's the number I remembered. That's why I said 4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if we did not make a change,
To go from
that's what it would be.
We're talking about
Council to approve this. It's just a recommendation, right? We can't change the policy. All we can do is suggest a recommendation to change it.
and that's what my motion was, to suggest to the council.
Okay, Dr. Browning's motion was to withdraw that line item out of the financial policy. Is there a second? All right, since there's no second, the motion dies for lack of a second. We're back to conversation.
Should have another motion, I would say, to advise them something. We don't just leave it hanging there. It's been presented. There needs to be a motion that we can all agree on, or we're not fulfilling our responsibility to the council.
Agreed.
I'd like to make a motion.
Fine.
It's kind of a compromise, but that's all right. I would make a motion that we change the wording to insert the words should be and put in your 5-year average. That's fine. It should be the average of 5-year average. However you want to phrase that. It'd be consistent with all the other statements in that section that talk about should be's.
I second that motion. Charles, go ahead.
Charles, thank you. There's a motion and a second. Any discussion?
I'd like to say something.
Charles and then Mark.
Okay, so speaking from what Dr. Browning had said earlier, I think he's right, but I think what we need in order to do the budget properly, we've been here before, is a need for a cost of service. If we don't know what the cost of our services are, right, that the city provides, I don't see how we can really effectively do a budget. And speaking to what Wanda said earlier about explaining to me this item, in terms of using like a 5-year average, that helps the cause, right? I mean, that keeps the reserve requirement higher than it would otherwise be if we just use a straight 100% revenue basis for each and every year, right? It would be lower this year if we didn't average in other more prosperous years. So, so it's a more conservative approach than taking this line on its literal basis. I'm not quite sure. I still like the fact that I'm not sure I like that number. I think maybe we should have more reserve, but that's beside the point. And one further thing in terms of understanding, just from my background working with requirements from a government perspective, military industrial complex type government perspective, any shall or should was a requirement. It was a will, will, or what's the should equivalent of will? Anyway, that was a suggestion, but a should or a shall, that was a requirement. So if we have a should in this document, we're specifying where it is a policy issue. It's not a guideline. A will would be a guideline. A shall or a should is a policy.
Policy, yeah.
Thank
Agreed.
you.
You bet. Alfonso? Oh, I'm sorry, Mark. Alfonso, we'll let Mark go and then we'll get to Alfonso. Mark,
Yeah.
hang on,
Um,
Alfonso.
I was just going to clarify the proposed language because I wasn't too clear on it, but it sounds like where the motion is for the general government fund balance should equal 100% of budget revenue for the preceding 5 fiscal years. Is that the motion, John?
That's the motion, John.
It should be for the 5-year average of the previous 5 years.
Yeah, the average of the private preceding. Okay, I just want to make that clear. Okay, thanks.
Should there be something said about the remainder of the, $19 million that's in there now?
Yeah.
That's
Michael?
not the motion. Alfonso, go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking again, maintain general government fund balance should be 200% or average 5 years. Well, we don't know how that will be our revenues. And again, we are talking about expenditures and reserves. So it can say that we need to have these not necessarily with the 5 years, only should be as an advisor that should be equal, but not necessarily will be because perhaps will change. If you will say the other is for me is more words. Instead of $5.2 million, is $4.8 million. So I don't see that. The other will go more tight with the reality. If you only add in this should be equal to 100%, so that gave it to you a little more flexibility. This is that I was thinking.
Okay, thank you, Alfonso. Mark?
I think a couple things. One is, the approach that this has always been on the assumption, it seems like it's always based on, I guess, the budgeted revenues, not the actual revenues, right? It'd actually be a much better policy, I think, to have like the actual revenues for the preceding, the years that we have them, right? So you can't really do that for the current year that we're in because we don't know what the revenues are going to do. But you could go back a year and say the actual revenues over the period of whatever, 3 years, 5 years, to come up with a better number, because when we budget for $4 million. Next year, we may actually get $5 million in revenue, right? Which, there's a big difference in that one example. It really hasn't been that probably big of a difference in past years, but that also something to consider, right? That budgeted revenues are going to vary drastically in this next coming year because we have no idea what those budgeted revenues, what they're going to match up to. So that might be something for us to consider as well. The other thing is that I think, as people have been stating, this is a policy, but the council can always override policy, right? So we've done it in the past. We did it for the administration buildings and police buildings. We're going to do it this year, right? So there's going to be some variation to, some of these other reserves, not the general fund, but some other ones. So it's always at the discretion of council to override these policies, for whatever purposes. But I do like the idea that we average it out. I actually kind of like the idea of maybe doing sorry, there's some background noise here. Maybe doing some, actuals versus budget, because I think in particular this upcoming year is going to be very difficult for us to figure out what that number really means.
Yeah, in times of an emergency,
Question.
declared emergency, all policies
Budget
off to
comes
the
in,
sideline.
say you get $5 million rather than $4 million. And my assumption from what you said is, okay, the budget's wrong because we didn't spend enough. I don't get the logic of that.
Okay, well, that was a for and against. Is there someone that wants to speak in favor of the motion? Anyone else? Anyone who wants to speak against the motion?
Yes,
Go ahead, Dr. Bryan.
I don't want to speak.
Dr. Browning, are you finished?
Yes,
Okay. All right, any other discussion on the item?
Yeah, against the motion?
On the motion, yes?
Against the motion. Okay, I think it's a good idea. It's easy to have opinions. Was very good, and one that she came with one position. But in my way, I will say that I will let that as is and wait until next year. Thank you.
Thank you,
Could I
Alfonso.
jump in?
Charles?
Yeah.
Charles Young?
I was going to say, going back to Mark's comment, if City Council has the discretion to change this as needed, does it really make any difference if we change this or not?
Wanda?
Well, if I may speak, my dogs are here, so hopefully they won't be barking. I do not want to make it easy for the city council to lower our reserve requirements. So that's why I want to put in the strongest language that I can to preserve that. And I want it to be realistic. And so that's why I'm suggesting the average. I do not want we will have a new council in a couple of months, a new mayor, possibly a new mayor, a new council. And at this point, under this policy, our reserve for the following year should be 4 million. And that worries me. I would like it to stay closer to the 5 million. And this is a rainy day fund. This is not to be used for capital projects or anything. This is the rainy day fund. So that is why I think that's important. And I would hope that any council would at least try to adhere to our financial policies. Thank you.
Okay,
Comment?
any other?
Yes, I have a comment.
Charles, I'm sorry. And then Charles and then Mark.
Okay. Yeah, again, what Wanda had to say, the idea for me. Could somebody help me out? Okay, so what Wanda is saying is to maintain as much of a reserve as possible. That's what I'm all about. That's why I'm in support of extending, of averaging out over a historical basis. I wasn't quite sure what people were talking about, what Mark Bruno was talking about actuals. I mean, or budget. I mean, we're talking about historical information. That's set in concrete, right? That's the past.
Hello?
So we look. Hello?
The clarification there is that the budgeted revenue we have for next year is $4 million. When we get to this point in the budget process next year, that's the number we're going to be using, but our actuals may be lower or higher than that, right? So when you're talking budget revenue, you're using the number we're plugging in right now, or that gets modified later. So that's the only point I was trying to make with that, is that in fact our actuals from the previous 5 years have been higher than our budgeted in the past, right? So that would actually up the reserve even more if we used actuals. Next year, we don't really have a clue what our revenue is going to be. We're plugging in a guess.
Right. Okay. Well, no, I assume that when we look over the past, we're going to be using actuals, not budgeted. So we use actual data, and it's a moving average, right? So yeah, if when next year comes, if our budget is lower this year, which it will be, that's going to affect that reserve. But then it begs the question too, that what you said also, Mark, is that this is something that is not technically a policy. If city council can change it willy-nilly, I mean, it is more of a guideline. So, how do we, if we do believe this as a group, that we want to maintain as much of a reserve as possible, to just build that rainy day fund, or have that rainy day fund in position, build it up to the greatest degree possible. But it begs one other point that Dr. Browning touched on, and that is all these other reserves that we have and how that figures in, and how in the past, I mean, like this year, we chose not to fund some of these other budgets, right, from the general fund. So we can kind of play around with this, and we can do whatever we can move this money however we see fit to accommodate whatever policy we generate, it seems like. So My point is simple. I just want to maintain as much of a rainy day fund as possible. That's my position. And whatever language we use to establish that, I'm all for it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I
Mark?
agree. We're kind of in tornado now. And so while we're having this meeting, the whole town could be taken out. And $5 million wouldn't be a start.
Mark?
Yeah, and I don't want my what I was trying to say is generally in agreement, I think, with Wanda and with you, Charles, that this, when we set a policy, what we're saying is that this is the starting point, and any council deviation from that has to be an action that they decide to take on with, any possible feedback or consequences, from the community. So we want that to be whatever the starting point is where we want it to be strong. You could potentially, make this a stronger enforcement, and I don't know, if we have guidance on like that by saying this has to be a super majority in order to change the, the budget or things like that. I don't think that anybody's talking about going down that route yet, but that would be additional protections you might put in, to say, requires, 4 out of 5 council members to, deviate from the budget process. So there's a little bit more control over that. I think the council's prerogative is always to, to do something in reaction to whatever the current conditions are. But we had to set a baseline, and we want that. And I agree that the baseline needs to be, a good baseline. I just want us to make sure that we recognize there are some variations we're going to get this next year because of the language, right? When we say budget revenue, that's specific language, and our targets. But in general, I like flattening it to make it a lot more of the 5-year average versus having reliance on one single year of data.
Okay, anyone want to speak against the motion that hasn't spoken already? All right. Unless there's any objection, we'll go ahead and do a roll call vote. Caroline, no. Susanna, did you keep the motion? Can you read that back to us?
I didn't do that, Sylvia, did you? Sylvia?
Okay, so it looks like, if I understand the motion, John, it's a maintain general government fund balance equal to 100, should be equal to 100% of the budget revenue for the rolling 5-year average. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Wanda, is that right? That what you said? Those were that?
Yes.
Based on actual or budget, John?
Yeah.
Actual.
Budget.
Actual.
Very good.
And then there was a second on that. All right, we'll go for the vote here. Alfonso? Alfonso?
No change.
No? Okay. Charles Goyette?
Yeah, no.
Yes.
Charles, yes?
Yes.
Charles Young?
Yes.
Mr. Blanca?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Dr. Browning?
Present.
I'm sorry?
Present.
Are you yes or no for the motion?
Yes. No, yes and no. I'm just saying I'm here.
That's
I
all
like
right.
what Wanda said.
Yeah, that's an abstention, I guess. And I'll vote yes.
Sorry, I was, Susanna muted me and I can't unmute. Okay, so maintain general government fund balance equal to 5 years of budget actuals.
Should be equal to a rolling 5-year actual average.
Okay, 5-year average of budget actuals, not, okay.
Yes. And that motion passed.
Did you include the word should be?
Should be.
I'm sorry, what was that?
And be sure to include should be.
Oh, okay.
Okay. we'll now jump back to continuing revisiting and discussing possible action on the remaining items for the budget, fiscal 21. We'll pick up where we left off. We'll hit the budget summary. Suzanne, if you want to hit that. And then we did the revenue chart already, and then we'll jump into the last remaining budget item. Suzanne?
Cool. Michael, before we move on, did that cover everything you wanted to cover in the financial policy? You said there was 2 points, I thought, but that was one.
There was a second point, but I think it's best if we just contemplate it. I think it's hard to do policies just right away. You sort of have to think about them. But what I want to, but eventually, go back to that page before, if you don't mind, Suzanne. Under the overall goals where it says flexibility is a goal. So next year, because we are doing a more austere budget, and we have cut some programs and such, and we don't know what our revenue is going to be. So we do need to be flexible. Our revenues may increase, our revenues may decrease. And if they decrease, City Council, under this flexibility, I'd like to see them to be able to adjust the budget for that. And if they increase, if there's a project that has been on hold until funds come in, then that could be approved at that point. So it's some sort of elasticity, I guess, is the way to do it. So I want kind of how, and I'm not sure, the mechanism we have now is using a budget amendment, where a budget amendment can come before council and say, our revenues are going to be $300,000 less. We would like to amend these expenditures and this revenue to this amount. So that's what we would do now, or the opposite way. So is that strong enough? Do we need some more guidelines in that? And this is just to think about, at what point can council make changes to the budget? They have that with the flexibility of the budget amendment, but do we want to make it a little more spelled out for them, I guess? So just some thoughts. I'd like to hear some feedback, and maybe this is something that we can address as we go along.
So Wanda, if I could address that, from my perspective, the budget amendment, yes, is the standard way to do it. But what this committee said is that we would be coming and monitoring the revenues and expenses every month as opposed to every quarter. And so what I would like to be able to show under an elasticity policy is that we're watching revenues and expenses very closely. So I would like to be able to report to the committee that, revenues were down 2%, and so we cut expenses 3%, or revenues are up, and so we have a potential surplus that we would review at the end of 6 months, if it continues in a surplus or something like that. I think those are stated goals that need to be within each budget report. What I find in other cities that I've managed and helped manage is that we kind of get stuck with the idea that we're supposed to bring a balanced budget. Balance is dollars in and dollars out. If we are in such a period of uncertainty, I would like us to be a little bit more fiscally conservative and always keep revenues above expenditures, and that be the goal of the city administrator every month, and to show that to both committee and council how they're doing it.
Maybe that's exactly what you just said is the way we approach that. Is expenditures must always be, or should always be, below revenues, or you said it much nicer than I did. So
Sylvia,
maybe you guys hammer out some language and we can put this on the next agenda. Because I think you're at least my feeling is, and others can talk, but I think we're heading in the right direction in terms of that elasticity that you're looking for. So it's coming from staff, there's collaboration with council and unity, and then that would let it move forward. That work? Can we do that? Instead of trying to hammer that out tonight.
Yeah, I'll add it to the next agenda.
Wanda, are you good?
I think that's fine. It's something I think we need to kind of think about.
Sure.
I have to say I thought that the first one was going to be a slam dunk, but obviously I didn't think it through well enough. So let's all think about it, and we can do some pros and cons and how to word it and what's the parameters if we want to set parameters. So yes, I think that would be fine.
Yeah, I like the language you guys were boiling on there, Mark.
Yeah, this is, and I sorry to belabor this particular document, but that flexibility goal is in somewhat contradiction to that first financial principle that's listed there. You know, we just kind of went over that. Sylvia mentioned, you know, the flexibility of a balanced budget is pretty inflexible and in some ways, right? I guess just a kind of a point of consideration for us, this year we're not proposing a balanced budget, right? And we're going against our financial principle. From just a matter of procedure, we have this principle or this policy, right? And can the mayor even present a budget that includes excess overruns in certain funds? And, you know, without some sort of council approval to bypass that. If we have that policy, it's sort of going contrawise to that flexibility, you know, that we want to have. But in general, it's a good policy because that's where we want to be. We want to be balanced with our, you know, revenues and our expenses, or at least, you know, to Sylvia's point, our revenues should exceed our expenses. So I don't know if that's not to derail our budget process or anything like that, but, you know, clearly that first financial principle is something that is going to have to be weighted by council as they're considering the budget.
Absolutely, and I think, Mark, the point specifically is the long-term solvency of the crime control budget. Specifically, I mean, we know we're going to draw down, and we won't have that ability next year. I mean, hopefully we're not in the same position, but within our budget itself, I really want to work with this committee on, as we work through the capital plan and don't tie up a lot of dollars unnecessarily, believing that we're going to have a project that we don't plan to have, working with our investment policy and making sure that our money is working for us when it's not working, when it's just sitting in the bank. That's one of the first things I want to work on. And then two is the long-term projections within each particular fund, because we have some automatic growth in healthcare. We have some automatic growth within our retirement system, and then the step increases within police department. All of those things need to be considered within the longer term fund balances of each particular fund, not just necessarily the general fund, which was my caution with the green taxes. Yes, I know we've put staff in all 7 funds now, but the staff cost always grows. And so I know one of the things the council asked me is make sure that you balance not only staff, but contracts and third parties so that we have a fair shake at being able to review all the information weighted against one another for the best decision.
Yeah. Terry, thank you, Sylvia. Mr. Cowan, you're muted. I thought you.
Yeah, I'm going to pick up on Mark's point. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. Should the Budget and Finance Committee forward a budget recommendation that's not balanced? We're looking at guidelines that say that we should forward a balanced budget. And the discussions have all been focused on planning for revenues to exceed expenses. And that may mean pushing big expenses, big projects like road repairs, et cetera. Even though the monies are in reserve, those are still expenses to the budget that's going to throw us in a deficit budget. Just saying, we can't have it both ways, like be kind of like high-minded about this, and we must stick to these rules, and turn around and do the opposite. It seems contradictory to me.
Well, I'm going to go back to the standard accounting T, right? If you you have income on one side and expense on the other. So an income on the income side is going to be a transfer from reserve. So what the mayor prepares and that we are preparing for the mayor is a balanced budget with a clear showing that we are transferring out of some of those funds. That cover sheet shows that. The council may very well say, no, we're not going to transfer out of street funds just yet. We're not going to transfer out for the Home Depot. We're not going to transfer out for Ernest Robles. We're going to wait. And we choose not to draw down. That's the biggest one. We choose not to draw that down. Or we choose not to draw down hot funds any further. The council may absolutely make those determinations. But a balanced budget does include the ability to transfer from reserves.
One of the thoughts I had too when I was thinking this, there's really no, and of course it's state law that would supersede whatever local entities are doing, right? You do the best of intentions, but when there's emergencies, as we're now experiencing, different rules kick in, and a lot of this stuff gets pushed to the side because it has to, right? You can't have a policy that says we're never going to go negative if you don't have any revenue. So there has to be some exceptions as we're currently dealing with, and maybe we want to have some language in here that says, we'll fund these things unless council declares an emergency, or I don't know. We try to do the best we can for every scenario, but who would have thought?
Yeah, well, the guidelines don't have emergencies in it, so they should be. If these guidelines are guidelines to be used, then that should be in the guidelines. That in case of emergency situations, then they don't apply the same way.
So when they pull together that language, we'll bring that back. That might be a part to add to that. Maybe in terms of the sound financial conditions may be defined as unless such and such happens, that we could add some language that says that, just that, right? Because it's so different for us. There isn't no property tax to back us up. All right,
Quick point,
Dr.
please.
Browning and then Charles Goyette, and then we'll try to move on. Dr. Browning, you're muted. Charles, okay, go ahead. Dr. Browning,
Yes,
you're on.
I didn't want to say anything. I was
Okay.
muted.
I thought you had your hand up. Charles, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to say that if we're going to be reviewing this in the near future. Sylvia, what you stated, could you put that into words and forward that to the members of the committee? That would be useful for me as a starting point, because I really liked that idea, and I think it's especially appropriate for us right now in this situation we're in. And something else that I gathered from listening in here, and remember, I'm the new guy, I always use that excuse. The whole notion about balance and balanced budget and what all that considers, it seems like, Terry, what he was talking about, and Michael, what you were talking about, or maybe Sylvia, what Sylvia was talking about, there was a difference in definition. So, I mean, it would be nice to nail down what exactly does a balanced budget mean. I mean, it seems like we're talking about more than just the general fund. We're also talking about our other reserves, which I wish we had another name for them, honestly, to make it very distinct. When we're talking about reserves, we're talking about general fund, and then these other cubby holes, these stashes, maybe we have a different name for them, a restricted reserve, maybe something that doesn't even have the word reserve in it, to help differentiate these two very different pieces of cash, of reserves. I'm using the same word in my definition, but you know what I mean. Okay, that's all I want to say.
Yeah, and Charles, you're right. By law, there are some things that council can't touch unless it's for specific things. It's also very difficult to obligate future councils through a document that we think this is how it should be right now, but we don't know what it looks like. So making it so tight that a council can't breathe it needs to have some pliability to it, right? So that they can make those. Plus, again, if it's an emergency, a state declared emergency, all bets are off, and we do what's best for the community. So I think that's what you're saying, Terry. We do the best planning we can, but when all bets are off, the mayor and the council are going to call the shots, and rightly so. Okay, anyone else? Good material. And as I'm looking down under that financial principles, the first one says a balanced budget should be prepared, and so we really should take some time and we talked about that, but got derailed earlier in the year about defining what reserves would be used for, right? We talked about that we'd been kicking around that for a couple of years, and here we are in the middle of it, and it's been difficult for us to grapple with that. But all the more reason to set some parameters of essential versus non-essential, and try to give future council some directive in terms of what we were thinking at the time. So I think we're going in the right direction.
One thing too, that our policy needs to be internally consistent, right? We can't have conflicting goals that obviously we can't meet because they contradict one another.
Agreed. All right, Juan, does that cover it? I didn't mean to cut you
Yes,
off.
I think so. Thank you.
Okay, good point, Mark. Thank you. All right, we're back to we left off last week at utilities, and we were going to pick up tonight at the street repair replacement fund. I'm sorry. Susanna, did you want to go over the summary sheet one more time? Was there anything in there?
It just shows the updates between last week and this week. If you guys had any interest in looking at that or discussing it, it's open to you.
No, I appreciate you appearing on that. I look at it every week. So, Mark?
I thought one of the changes, maybe I missed this in OpenGov or in some of the data, but for the utility fund revenue, I thought we added or to our budget at least, the one we're reporting to council or to the mayor, is the solid waste increase. But I didn't see it reflected in these numbers. Maybe I missed it.
I'm sorry, I haven't had a chance to add that part back yet. That's my mistake. I'll make sure it's added.
Okay, thanks.
Can you whip that up before we go tonight so we can see that impact? Is that fair to put you on the spot like that?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay. You're wonderful. Thank you. Good catch, Mark. All right, we're on to street repair and replacement.
Can I interrupt real quick
Sure.
on something? On the utility fund, can we pull up the revenues? I've noticed as I was going through our interest revenues, we went ahead and I think we put those at 25% less, but I'm not sure why our interest revenues would go down unless we are thinking that our interest rates would go down so far.
I think it's a combination of a couple of things. It's a combination of not having as much money in the bank because the utility wouldn't receive the subsidy, and then also a reduction in rates. And this is, again, one of my, you're going to hear me bang the drum, because we have our money in TexPool and TexStar, which pays historically low rates, and multiple municipalities use it. In fact, it's the standard. But there's nothing that prevents us from creating investment policies where our money is still FDIC insured, but is at least working for us.
Right. I mean, I think that if we can look at something that we would get a little better rate. I know rates are really low now anyway, but that's as long as it's insured that we couldn't lose it. So, but I thought that the utilities, when I looked at it on the revenues, if I pull that up, it looks like we, in fiscal year 19, we had 56,000, and now we're budgeting 30,000. And I don't think we budgeted any in wastewater. which I believe we had another 56,000 in that account. So I think all we're budgeting is like 30,000 or so.
We'll go back and take a look at that.
So, okay, thank you.
On the subject of utility fund?
What's that, Charles?
Yeah, on the subject of utility fund, this may not be an appropriate question for this forum, but a question to the city. Curious if they received any flack from the proposal that was made by the Budget and Finance Committee last meeting about raising the the fee on waste pickup.
No one's contacted me.
Not yet, but when you guys get done tonight and we publish the budget as in development draft, we're going to open a town hall comment and survey section, so folks will have the ability to. It's still early, Charles, is what I'm saying.
Okay,
Way early.
thanks.
Still got a long road to go. All right, Carolyn's with us. Any questions on the street repair replacement? Any of the fund expenses there that anyone wanted to revisit? All right, Dr. Browning?
No,
Dr. Browning,
what?
we're now on hot funds and you wanted to revisit hot funds.
No, I don't want to be on my phones that I'm aware of.
Well, I think you wanted to talk about farmers market.
Well, yeah, I've already said all there is to say. I had to go over there this weekend, but I couldn't get there. But I sum it up by saying I think it's an embarrassment to have it in Sunset Valley.
Was that a motion to withdraw funding?
Well, the funding we get, we're spending 6,000. We're spending what? I forgot what it was, several multiples of the $550 a month of rent. And it's just a pittance. It doesn't even pay for itself. And as far as the service, I see less and less people over there. And the last 3 times I've been, I took some out of town guests and I didn't buy anything. And it was not all farmers market. A lot of it was from Mexico and California. And there was no one there. So if it's costing us anything, I don't see what that we're getting. It's not only that we're not getting anything, I think it's bad to have it here the way it's run right now. And I had another citizen tell me the same thing, said they took a guest over there and they were embarrassed.
Okay, anybody else got, okay, Terry and hot funds? Terry, you're muted. Terry, you're muted.
Regarding the farmers market, I know there's a minority of people that don't like the farmers market. The farmers market is the only place that people can buy fresh food that's within the boundaries of Sunset Valley. There is a COVID epidemic going on, and I'm not at all surprised that attendance is down over in the farmers market area. That's the same is true for a lot of the smaller businesses in Sunset Valley. The farmers market, I know currently that there's plans that this whole thing about how to brand Sunset Valley. Well, this whole this organic food, fresh food, environment, trails, dark skies, open spaces, all of that is actually what distinguishes us from the cities around us in a lot of towns. And that's our best chance, I think, to establish a brand that would attract people into our city. Otherwise, we're just another small town strip mall, so to speak. So I think it's a pound, it's penny wise but pound foolish to reduce budget for the farmers market and the hot funds.
Well,
Okay.
with all due respect, when was the last time you were over there?
Well, it was closed the last time I was over. There's hardly anybody there. But Dr. Browning, it's not fair to hold the attendance standard during the pandemic to farmers market. You know it's not.
Well, all
I'm
of
surprised you're doing it.
And I would have to point out that all the comments I made and that were made by another citizen were well before the virus came. It was back in February and March.
Well, the pandemic started in February.
No, we didn't have shutdowns or anything. It started in April, really.
Okay, guys, if we want to take action on an item, we can go back and forth all night. But if somebody wants to make a motion to do something, otherwise, keep in mind, this doesn't come out of general revenue. So this is not affecting general revenue. If we can help the farmer's market be successful, then maybe there's some value in it. But if we want to take action, somebody want to make a motion?
No, but I would say that I'm not opposed to the farmer's market. I agree with Terrence that, it'd be nice to have one here that's good. And there are any number of them all around us. And that's where I go now, and where everybody else I know that wants good, fresh vegetable goes. They don't go to Sunset Valley. So if it was well managed and we had vendors in there, and maybe get somebody like Boggy Creek or whatever, I think it would be a real big asset. And I would go there all the time.
Excuse
Okay,
me?
Charles?
Yeah, and that's perfectly consistent with what I was going to say. I was going to say that what Terry had to say was right on. I mean, that's right. That's what Sunset Valley's all about. I think if we reduce that tax rate, would even be better, would even be more distinguished, but that's a whole nother topic. And I can't say that I've been to the Sunset Valley Farmers Market for quite some time, so I don't have any basis for comparison, but I have been to meetings, a lot of meetings, city council meetings, and the company that's responsible for advertising the Sunset Valley Farmers Market was taken to task. And as far as I'm concerned, they lied. The representative just flat out lied to the city council. And if a motion's going to be made, and I don't know that it's the place for the Budget and Finance Committee to make such a motion, I believe the city needs a new manager for that facility, because I think it benefits our city, and like Dr. Browning said, if it's done right, then great. But I don't think it's sounding from what I'm hearing from people, it doesn't sound like it's being managed properly. And anybody that lies to me in a public forum, as far as I'm concerned, doesn't, they're out, they're gone, it's over, the relationship's done. So I'll make a motion to recommend to City Council that they change the management, whatever company is presently managing the Sunset Valley Farmers Market, that we go back out for bids and replace them with somebody that can do the job better, and that doesn't lie.
Yeah, Charles, that's not the agenda item, so we really can't. We need to post that. If we're going to take that kind of action, we would need to post that on the agenda in that manner.
Okay, understand.
And I hear your frustration, but what we can do tonight is whether we want to fund them or not.
No, I suggest that we not fund them.
You want to put that in the form of a motion, Dr. Brown?
Yes, that's a motion.
Okay. Is there a second to Dr. Browning's motion? Okay, motion dies for lack of a second.
Excuse me, I'll second that motion.
Okay. There's a motion that's been made and seconded to withdraw the funding for the SFC Farmers Market. Anyone want to speak in favor of the motion that has not already spoken? Anyone speak
may I
against?
just add some information? This is Rudy Rosengart. I don't know if all of you know this, but the farmers market has not been advertising per the rules. The rules are all marketing that is done for Sunset Valley Farmers Market is supposed to have the Holiday Inn logo on their marketing pieces, and they have not been doing this. I went to the farmer's market this weekend. 31 farmers were supposed to be there, 19 were there. This is not uncommon. I have been to the farmer's market before COVID-19, before January of 2020, and it also looked very similar to what I just saw this weekend. So, yes, I agree. A farmer's market adds a nice touch. Every time I worked on weekends, I always wondered what it was like to go to a nice farmer's market, And that shortly changed after I got the chance to go, but there wasn't a whole lot to see or do. So if we opened it up to more arts, more jewelry every weekend, I think it would draw more. Thank you.
Terry? You're muted.
Additional information, the Arts Commission is working with the city to manage farmers market, to put and for us to contract manage whoever the contractor is. And we want to expand the farmers market to include art and jewelry and those things. That is in the works right now. The plan is being written right now. So
Terry,
I would just ask people not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. If we have a vendor, that's one issue, but I think everybody agrees the farmers market is good for the city. We just want it done right.
Terry, I just spoke to the chair of that commission and nothing's been, as a matter of fact, today on this very topic, but you guys have not presented a plan forward, correct?
The plan that our plan will go in Friday. It's been worked on right now.
Well, remember, council can always put it back. All right, anyone to speak? That was the motion in favor. Anyone to speak against the motion? John?
Well, it's not against the motion. It's a comment to Rudy's comment. The Sunset Valley should have a procedure, and I think it has, and they should follow it, to not honor requests for hot funds unless they have a receipt and it meets all the requirements. So if the farmer's market submits a receipt requesting reimbursement, if they're not following the rules, we shouldn't pay it, period.
I agree. If they're not following agreement, then they shouldn't fund them. But that's not our agenda item.
I understand.
Yeah, I agree with you completely, John. It's maddening. Our motion is to withdraw the funding. Anyone else to speak for or against?
Michael, one more thing.
Quick, Charles.
As the second, the reason I seconded it is I wanted some more discussion on it, and based upon additional information, I mean, I want the Sunset Valley Farmers Market. I just don't like it the way it is, and like I said, I don't think the company that's responsible for running this is reasonable. I think they're, what's the right word? I'm struggling for the right word, but in any case, I retract my second because I don't want this farmers market to go away.
All right, that second's been withdrawn, so the motion, unless there's a seconder.
Well, I didn't say anything about doing away with the farmer's market. I also said do away with this vendor and improve it. And if you keep giving him funds, that's doing nothing.
Remember, the council can always amend the budget later this year, and if they're able to work out the kinks in that process and they're comfortable with it, they can refund that item. Okay, so motion dies for lack of a second. Anything else in hot funds to cover? All right, we'll move on to the green tax venue. I like it better, green tax. Are there any items within that, the expenses there that anybody wants to revisit? All right, we're on to repair and replacement fund. Mr. You're muted. You're muted, Terry.
Thank you. In regard to repair and replacement, I've talked before about that those funds are not rigorously backed up, and that the information is out of date, et cetera, and that I saw that as a reduction of paying into the fund as an opportunity to reduce the budget deficit, while the Budget and Finance Committee works on that aspect, because there's a lot of dollars tied up with those repair and replacement funds. Historically, Sunset Valley did not have those for many years. That happened back when I was mayor. And it was a way to put dollars in reserve to repair and replace equipment so that it didn't have to be a burden on the department's budget. It was what Charles was talking about, this whole other world of revenue that we have that's not really visible to most of the citizens, I think. So I don't have any specific comments about repair and replacement as far as this particular fund, except that this really needs to be looked at. And I hope the Budget and Finance Committee will do that. Thank you.
Agreed. Thank you.
I think, Terry, for me personally, this is one of the reasons I talked about what I'm calling an elasticity policy. And I really go back to some of the conversations I had with Regine when I first got here about her role as the accountant and trying to manage a budget where the directors were essentially reporting to the administrator, not her. And so sometimes things wanted to be purchased that were more a desire than an actual need. And the staff, the liaisons to the committees become very friendly. And so I really, really, as part of equipment repair and replacement, that's why I've been asking the Budget and Finance Committee, and now with Susanna on board, who has a background in capital budgeting, to really take a look at that, because I'm going to get some daggers thrown here, but I'm going to say this. When we did the backhoe purchase not too long ago, it is a very nice to have. It absolutely is. But when you break down the hours that machine has on it, and yes, it is 15 plus years old, but when you break down the hours on it, it appears that we use that machine for about 7 hours a week. But we spent over $130,000 for that machine here recently. Yes, the Public Works Committee approved it. Yes, staff provided some backup and documentation. But, when I got here, we were really down that path. I would really like us and this committee to help me really dissect some of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Sylvia. I think there's items on there that if we got very creative, we could outsource some of those, and especially on a rental, right? You're bringing the equipment in, you're using it for a precise amount of time, and then you're not maintaining it. And yes, it may be costly to do that, but overall, it pulls that expense out of the repair and replacement. I think there's several items in there like that need to be yanked out of there. Mark?
Yeah, and my apologies for not remembering how we got to the zero expenses, but the 130,000 revenue, that's based on the schedule that's backing up some of this the equipment repair replacement. Did we zero out the expenses because we deferred all planned new acquisitions, or is that because there aren't any planned acquisitions in general and that this is always like a zero expenditure budget?
We zeroed it out because this is a contributory budget, mostly from the general fund. And I really wanted Susanna and this committee to take a look at that before we begin contributions again.
I think we should zero out the contributions this year. Because if we're pausing expenses, we might as well just pause the contributions and do the evaluation. We've got $130-something thousand in general fund transfer. We might as well just zero that out.
I would agree. You get an amen from me.
I'll make a motion to zero out the operating or the general fund transfer into the equipment repair and replacement fund.
I'll second it.
All right, Charles Young. No, I agree. Like we've talked about, how many trucks are in Public Works, and there's half the staff. Those need to be adjusted out. We just bought several brand new trucks. But I think all those other trucks are in there within that number and amortized out, and that needs to all be looked at. I agree. And that was one of our to-do items this year, right? But something snuck up on us called COVID and derailed a lot of what we're going to try and do this year. So I agree. It needs to be looked at. All right. Anyone to speak against the motion? All right, well then let's go ahead and do a roll call vote. Alfonso?
Okay,
Charles?
Yes.
Rhea? Yes. Charles Young?
Yes.
Mr. Blanca?
Yes.
Mr. Bruner?
Yes.
Dr. Browning? All right, and I'll vote yes. No response from Dr. Browning. All right, we're on to drainage expense. Are there any items there people wanted to revisit? Suzanne, can you make that correction on the summary sheet before we go?
For the repair and replacement, I've zeroed it out. That's what you're asking.
Thank you, yes. Any questions on drainage expense?
hello, Michael.
Mr. Carmona?
Okay, Suzanne, after looking the drainage, I was checking, and I think that in your summary, the budget summary, if you will go to the bottom, in the drainage, only you have 69,000 as a difference. But that $69,000, you need to add $123,000 that they are projects for drainage. So the residual that you will have in the last square for drainage fund, instead of 469,000, will be $365,000. So if you will check that, only you allocate as expenditures $173,000, but you need to add $123,000 more.
From where?
For projects that we have.
That
Or-
number includes the project.
What's
So
that,
the
Carol?
total expenses for drainage, including the projects, is 173,000.
Okay, so it's because we discussed that we will be working with Jones Road, and was some expenditures that we will be doing that for drainage, and we postponed the dam, and basic will be only, you say, the 123 they are included. So this
Yes,
is why
the
you have
123.
173. So,
Yes.
okay, if that is the case, I am wrong and you're right. Thank you, Susan.
Phew, I always thought, holy cow, how did we miss that? All right, we're on to projects. Any questions on that?
I have one quick question.
Wanda?
So on the Jones Road AISD master meter, Sylvia, you and I were talking about this yesterday. If it's not contractually required,
Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure why we would want to do this. And so I think if we could do some sort of, I know you've been looking into it, and maybe you can update us on that.
Sure. So part of the information that we have to provide to the Water Development Board and our projects that we're going to be doing each year, I received some information, I guess about a month and a half ago, about some potential funding that was available for us, and it seemed like a large amount, and so I started to dig into it. And it was the acquisition of an additional water source. Well, when you dig into it, it's because Austin's long-term water plan is that each entity, each municipality, each customer that it provides to other than its own residents should be working to obtain their own water rights. We can still use the Austin distribution system, but we need to obtain our own water rights from whatever mean or method that may be here. And so the Water Development Board is working with Central Texas to make sure that everybody is sort of heading in that direction. So with that in mind, right, and given that our utility fund is not an enterprise fund, it doesn't make any money, I'm unsure as to why we would take on Austin ISD. It makes sense if they're this awesome revenue source for us, but you also have to balance that with the need to have to acquire water rights in the future to serve them. That's the first thing. And then, so somebody said, well, but we have to serve them because our CCN boundaries, cities are granted, they're called certificates of convenience and necessity. You have to serve everybody within your CCN boundary. That's not necessarily true. We can cede CCN boundary back to Austin if that's the case. I just want to look at it from a completely 50,000 foot cost benefit ratio. If in 20 years we're going to have to be looking for water, and water's the new gold, it's not cheap. It doesn't make sense for us to have a large customer online like that.
Yeah, I would agree. And before we jump into this project, maybe we need more clarity on the contractual requirements and if it's actually required or not. So
I'm okay with also zeroing this project out because there's even in its best case scenario, the contract I believe has completion in 2022. Even if it's in its best case scenario, we wouldn't be done in 2022. And then the other thing too is, you know, again, we talk about the domino effect and the trickle down. So some of Sunset Trail, some of the upsizing for Sunset is also for fire protection and fire flow, because we know in the long term, serving Austin ISD means you have to have bigger lines because they need to have the flow to serve the sprinkler system, right? Otherwise, you know, they can't, you know, it doesn't work. And so that's also another consideration is are we really prepared after we're about to do Sunset to come back and do it again with a much larger line? So I'm trying to piece those pieces of the puzzle together before we spend a dime.
well, I would support zeroing that project out.
Any objection, committee members? Okay. So be it. Sylvia, it goes without saying, we're looking for you guys, especially for staff, to give us feedback on something. If it's in here and you guys are like, we're not sure, now's the time. I mean, council can always change it, right? But now's the time to make those kind of changes.
Yep, that's one of them. I had spoken to Wanda, I don't know, maybe last week, Wanda, as we, you know, as we begin to dissect what our long-term infrastructure needs are going to be. And really that goes back to the conversation that I want Budget and Finance to help me with capital budgeting, as well as the Public Works Committee, that we be really tight at the hip, because Councilmember Rosengarten's last motion at council was for us to work toward impact fees. Well, impact fees means land use maps. Impact fees mean adopted and approved capital improvement plans. So we've got some work ahead of us.
And perhaps we should do some joint committees with them if we're going to have these conversations, as opposed to them having one conversation, us having another. It would just take, it'd be much easier if we just come together and boil through that as a team.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Good idea.
It's much more efficient. All right. Is there anything else talked about tonight that you need to go back to? Charles?
Yeah, the item just underneath that one, I know at the Public Works meeting, we discussed this a little bit, and Sylvia explained that the lift station and the fact that it's just it's a no, you know, it's a blank item on the budget, but there is some expense. I guess it's projected expense, right? There's no firm commitment on expense, if I understood that properly.
Correct.
That's in this year's budget, though, isn't it?
We, in the long range plan, there's a council item that's set for Tuesday. In the prior long range plan, it showed this year was intended to budget $221,000. Obviously, that's not the case. What's there is $34,000. The engineering alone has come back at, I believe, $82,000. And we're having some serious discussion as to whether it's a new lift station or a rehab. Now, I'll give you the pros and cons to both. A rehab, we don't have to do anything super intense with TCEQ. There's some, what I'm going to call shortcuts to take. But the other part about that lift station is we have that rezoning that just occurred on Stearns that is going to have some impact into that lift station. So I've already spoken to the developer saying they're going to have to help pay for their impact into that lift station, and that will probably be a couple $100,000. But I'm fully expecting the lift station to be in the 250, 350 range.
Well, there's no time like the present, and if we're going to go in there rehabbing versus bringing that up to a more modern piece of equipment, that pays dividends in the long run, right? Otherwise, you're doing it again in a shorter amount of time. If that's what I think I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, yeah.
So what do we need to put into this number for this year?
I don't have a good number. All I have is the proposed engineering, which is $82,000.
Perhaps we should put that in there. Just as a starting point, so there's a funded line item. Council can adjust that if need be. I think this is one of those essential projects, right? That thing's a dinosaur.
It is absolutely essential, but what I would prefer is that council do a budget amendment at the point that we need it. What I'd hate to see happen is that we sort of rush into something for the sake of rushing into something because the money's there. Yes, it's a very important project. Council has asked for updates. There will be an update on Tuesday, but we're also waiting on some direction. I mean, I don't expect the council to say just go replace the pumps because that wouldn't be smart. But I never know.
Okay.
They can take it from reserve is my point later on in the future, or make a budget amendment.
Good counsel. All right. No, I don't want to knee jerk, but I just want, if we have a rough idea of what some of those funds are going to be, but if it's better to wait and council do a comprehensive analysis, that's a much better approach.
Now, as Charles mentioned, Sunset Trail is also another project that is way out there because there's portions of Sunset Trail that require mill and overlay, and then there's portions of Sunset Trail that will have a water line replaced where you can't mill and overlay the street. I mean, it has to be complete street reconstruction. So that's why Sunset Trail looks so large. But the Public Works Committee on Tuesday, I believe, at Councilmember Gonzalez's urging, said we would only move forward with the engineering analysis for Sunset Trail, that we wouldn't move forward with any additional street, water, or any other work until we resolved some of the drainage issue and the drainage question as to whether we can hold a prior engineer liable. So Sunset Trail is another one of those that can be off to the side at this particular moment. So if it would make the committee feel better to zero out Sunset Trail, but to put in 82,000 into the lift station, that would be appropriate as well.
Could I jump in one more time?
Yeah.
Well, it's not about feeling better. It's just what if it leads to a more strategic objective. In other words, gives you what you need to. I mean, either way, council's going to fully fund that properly. Right? It sounds like what I'm hearing is that the numbers are coming in way higher than, which isn't a surprise. Happens a lot.
Well, the project is coming in more complex than we had originally intended the project to come in at.
Michael?
Charles?
Alfonso, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I would like to say something, but if you want to say something first, go ahead.
Well, I just the fact that I'd suggest just moving that 100,000 over, as a placeholder, just to give the people an idea that there is some expense that is going to hit the budget at some point in time or another next year, right? Because this is a priority item to get corrected, this lift station. And as far as the Sunset Valley Trail, the chairman actually was the initiator of just cutting back on that budget item to a $15,000 amount. That was the amount of money that was required to evaluate the drainage problem, to not include any of the funds associated with fixing it, seeing we didn't really fully understand the problem yet. So it was that item turned into a $15,000 item. So I
Hello?
would suggest putting 15 there instead of zeroing it out.
Okay, Alfonso?
Yeah, almost I will go the same than Charles because I attend that meeting, and in reality, the information that they brought, Mickey Power and other people, was important. The hydraulic analysis, and in that way, they try to have that project of Jones and Sunset in 3 areas. One area was drainage, another area was a water line, and the other was the street. So after we discussed a lot, we found that the hydraulic study was the much better and was only $15,000 and no $100,000, and was all the study. And the other part, the street can wait and the water can wait, and only we allocate that money, 15,000, for the hydraulic analysis. Looking the other point, lift station, wastewater, I think that is a critical part, and everybody knows that it's very old. But the study or the estimate that I can see at this moment that they will discuss next Tuesday, they have for engineers, and it has all the faces of the engineers, and that has around $82,000. I think that in that area is totally different. I think that we need to work with the lift station, but I don't believe that at this moment the committee is part of that. I think that they have that as an item for city council, and we need to take care of that. But they will decide the scope because it's $82,000 for engineering. So they are 2 separate projects. So I continue with the support the 15,000. Then we propose the Public Works Committee for the hydraulic analysis in Jones and Sunset, and let the other project that is lift station for discussions this Tuesday. And I think that we will find a much better ideas. Thank you.
Yep. So thank you, Mr. Carmona. So what that does, Susanna, line 9 for Sunset Trail gets zeroed out. That also zeroes out line number 19. And then yes, it also zeroes out line number 25. And then in the drainage utility at Sunset Trail, number 19 should be renamed drainage utility, and that should be $15,000. And then in line number 24, that should read wastewater, and that should have $82,000 put in there.
Right. Good.
Michael, could I ask a question for clarification?
Dr. Brennan?
Yeah, and by the way, I got knocked out of go to meeting a while ago. I was trying to tell you yes, but I couldn't get it to unmute.
Okay. You got real quiet there.
Yeah, online in Public Works, line 65 or 5745. No, wait a minute, that's not right. It's line 60 or 5711. It's got open space management, $40,000. And it says it's to provide plans and maintenance open areas and the funding to to manage nearly 270 acres. And then if you go over to the green fund expenses, it's got the exact same amount again on line 5711. Is that the same thing twice, or is it different? And why does it take $40,000 to do 270 acres of woods?
5711 was that account code? That was that. No, 57. Yeah, 5711.
Carolyn, was that a, did we move it from Public Works all into the green tax? Yeah, Susanna, can you pull OpenGov up and see what we did there?
Yeah, mine says $500.
Well, the one that was made by the policeman, and I think it was on the other one as well, says $40,500.
It was in venue.
Yes, there's $40,000 in the venue tax for open space management.
So
And
it
there's
should be,
$500 in general fund in case there are some things that we cannot justify in the open space.
Can't hear you, Carolyn.
Can you hear me?
Speak up. Speak up a little.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
Okay. So yes, there's $40,000 in the venue tax for open space management. There's $500 in the general fund. The general fund money is for anything that we do in the open spaces that cannot be justified as a watershed protection item. And so you can see in the history, we have had some items come up that are not related to watershed protection in the green space. So the majority of green space funding is in the green tax. And I believe in OpenGov, there was a map that put in and talked about the different projects that take place in each of those green spaces. So that includes fire break maintenance, that includes brush control, that includes several items in those green spaces, like we said, 270 acres of land that we usually have to bring contractors in to help manage some of those areas. And so what we did this year was we took the money out of general government, and we aren't budgeting that in general government, and fire control and fire mitigation will be part of the green tax budget from now on.
Susanna, can you jump back to that worksheet that Dr. Browning saw? Because it did look like 40,000 was in two places.
That was the totals across all instances,
Oh,
so
okay.
that brought
Totals
in
across all
4,500.
That's the total column.
Yeah, so it's only 500 in the public works and 40,000 in venue.
Okay, gotcha.
But that's not what it shows.
It shows it here. I'll show you here. So there was a column open that was called totals across all instances. Here. There we go. So that's where you saw that 40,000. Where'd it go? Let me find it. There it is. So it shows 40,500 in the totals across all instances, but the only amount budgeted for this department is 500. So this includes here and also venue tax.
So that's what
Does that make sense?
I didn't understand.
Yeah, remember that's green tax money.
So is that just, that's not an expense, but it's on the expense sheet?
It's just a column that shows how much the total costs are for that one GL across all different departments.
So why do we budget $500?
That'll be a Carolyn question.
Yes, that's what I was saying earlier, that there are times when there are certain things that we do out in the open spaces that do not account for watershed protection. It's not a water quality issue we're dealing with, but it's some other issue that's come up that we're trying to address that we use those general fund dollars for.
So is there a total of $80,500 that's being spent?
No, it's $40,500. $500 in the general fund, $40,000 in the green tax.
Okay. Where does it say that it says Well, I can't read it. It's purple with black print. I can't see what that last column is. It says for FY 13, no, 21. Proposed Greenbelt, as best I can tell. So there's a total of 40,000 for open space management and watershed quality. And that also 40,000 includes repair and maintenance of the open areas. And the funding for 270 acres, that's pretty general. It still doesn't say what you do with $40,000. And it's not 40,000 in both places. It's 40,500 under Public Works, and it's 40,000 only under Green. So it's not the same thing.
Hold on. I just see 557.11 in Public Works.
Well, I'm sitting here looking at 4 columns. The fiscal year 20 was 40,000. The projected actuals for 20 were 20,000, and then for 21 it's got 40,000. That's under the I think that's the green tax.
It's green.
Yeah, green tax. And then if you go over to the Public Works, that's where it's got 40,500, and the column where it says proposed is 50,000. My question is, what's the 40,500 that you say is the cost?
Yeah, Michael.
Alfonso?
Yeah, I think in the page 12, and they refer Public Works, they led one column, the last column, that blue, and that show all the expenditures for that account. And for that account, that is open space, is 40,500. She encumbered 500 in Public Works. In reality, we don't need to have that last column because that confused some people. But in Public Works, she put $500, and later she go to green tax. And in green tax, in the row 28, 5711 account, this is the other $40,000. So she's using only one time 40,000, and in this 500. I don't know. In reality, it's unnecessary to have that 500 in Public Works because will be 40,000, and she will go in green tax. And the big confusion is the last column, the blue, then that show all the expenditures for the account, and that is a little confused. That is the problem.
Yeah, and I agree. But in Susanna's defense, that's something we talked about. You guys wanted to have one column that would kind of search out all the different account codes and correlate them. And that column is now showing up on this sheet, and that's what that is. So that's why. Hold on. That's why you're seeing it in 2 places. But that one column is only adding it once.
But the column before that, it says the projected actual is 20,000.
Suzanne?
Yeah, Michael.
Yes.
I think, Michael, the problem is that blue is only in Public Works, so we don't have that column in other funds. Only was in Public Works, and perhaps needs a little more description for people that is not familiar, because that is confused. So But if you repeat that blue column in the green tax, that will be understand and much better to understand. This is that will help perhaps.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you.
But they
We're getting
didn't.
better.
It says,
Confusing because
it says under the venue tax, expense for 20 is $20,000, not 500. And then under public safety, it's describing the same thing, and it's 500. If you go one column back, I agree with what Alfonso said, but if you ignore that column and just go one column back, it's 500, and then it's 250 the year before. But if you go over to the venue green fund, the projected actual for this year expenditures is 20,000, not 40,000. And 40,000, it says, was adopted, but the projected actual cost is only 20,000. That doesn't make sense either.
Well, okay, so let me try to explain a little bit. So some of this item, this is part of that big complicated shell game, right? This item, open space management, used to reside in both the green tax and also the general fund. But the greater portion of it was within the general fund. So if we have a venue tax whose sole purpose is to protect our green spaces and help us open space manage, and water quality, which is part of open space management, then it makes sense that that expense should be here. That's why we left very little in the general fund. We only left $500. The total amount for open space management is $40,500 total across all funds. 40 in the green tax and 500 in the general fund.
Well, it doesn't show that anywhere. It shows that the actual this year is going to be 20,000. Now, before that, it says we adopted for 40,000, but then in the column it says projected actuals post-COVID is 20,000.
Yes, and that's because during COVID we had a reduction in staff, and we have not been in the open spaces as much as we would like to be.
Well, I thought she said that she was planning to spend 40,000 this year.
right. This budget year,
Yeah.
So that's,
this coming budget year.
yeah, the proposed budget year for 2021 is 40.
2021.
This year we have 20, and we may not even make that 20.
So if we don't make the 20 this year, that has nothing to do with COVID. That goes back to my first comments. If it only costs us 20,000 and we can do it, why are we budgeting 40,000?
Well, the thing to keep in mind, Dr. Browning, is we didn't. And so a lot of things that were scheduled to be done, all that's been put on hold.
Well, I'd like for that to be clear in some fashion to us so we can say whether or not we agree to that. As to whether or not all those things that were left undone really needed to be done, or could it be at a lesser level or less components to it?
That's absolutely a very valid question, and one that we talked with planning and environmental the other night, and that's going to be something you keep hearing me talk about cost of service. One of the questions planning and environmental asked is, what things are we doing at a reduced level and what's the appropriate level? And I don't have a response for that because we didn't really keep good records of what we were doing to defend what we were doing. And so what I have asked Carolyn to do, and she has put together like the map that you saw before. We are meeting with our contractor who does our mowing. I need to compare what the contractor would charge us and what it would cost for staff to do it. And I'm in the process of doing that. I hope to get that by the middle of next week. And that number may be able to be reduced. It may not be. But what I want to see in our budgets moving forward, which I can't show you today, unfortunately, is some sort of metric that says we mowed 50 acres. And so every acre mowed costs us this amount of money. So then when we're going out for RFP, or we are making the comparison of contractor versus staff, I at least have a comparison. Right now, we do things because we had such a small staff and now it's even smaller. You know, if you listen to the meeting on Monday, it was a lot of, well, maybe, sometimes, and kind of. I don't blame that on Carolyn. I blame that on how we were so siloed. She was reduced to just a couple of staff. And now, really, with the shrunken staff, she really has the same amount of staff because she's able to make them be generalists as opposed to just, you know, the specialists that she had to work for and had to ask to borrow staff, and relied on the youth program and relied on temps and those kinds of things to do some of that work. Part of our transition, if we don't staff back up and we go to third party, is going to be learning how to manage contracts and those kinds of things. So I hear what you're saying, Dr. Browning. I don't have what is an appropriate level at this point. I just don't have that information.
Well, let me just say, you never cease to amaze me, and I agree with everything you said.
Oh, thank you.
So Sylvia, just to that tune, and we've talked about this in the committee as well, sometimes there's items that are budgeted, there's no strategic objective, right? Like we always talk about every year because it's such a big, what's the goal? How much land are we going to mitigate, and when have we finished mitigating, and is this something we have to start over with? What's the plan? What's the objective? And every year we just keep refunding that, but some of those things seem somewhat nebulous. So I think that's kind of what you're saying here.
Yes.
What is the goal and objective and costs, and you know, will we ever reach that objective, or is part of the objective is we've met that goal, now here's what we have to do to maintain that. And
exactly, and that's where that big nebulous item is. You know, we get complaints. As a matter of fact, I got a complaint yesterday that said our open spaces look like crap in this particular area. Well, they were in an area that is really a very natural area. It doesn't have a lot of trails in it because it's supposed to be left natural. And if you don't understand that that's what that area is supposed to look like, it's very easy to say it looks like crap, right? So part of the discussion is, yes, there's an education component that our residents and our visitors need to find out. But more than that is you're right, a strategic work plan every single year. Because I keep getting asked, well, how much staff do you need? How much staff do you need? And the honest answer is I can't tell you right now, because the reality is nobody has agreed with what product, what service, what level. We haven't agreed on any of those things. We're just right now working on essential. I mean, just the basic. And open space management ties to wildfire and it ties to protection. But that's not the only thing it ties to, right? If we're talking about fire, what the heck are we doing with our hydrants and all of the other pieces that tie together? And so I want to make sure if we're spending money in open space management because it's a wildfire issue, then that's what we're addressing. If we're dealing with open space management because it's pretty, right? Or because we have a TCEQ, then I need to address that as well. And how I address it will be different based on why we're addressing it a certain way.
Well, the answer to that open space complaint is that that's the way God wanted it managed.
In that particular area, yes, that was the answer.
Yeah, green space shouldn't look like a manicured yard. That's not the purpose. Yeah. All right, any other go back items? All right, we are then on our last agenda item, review, discuss, and possible action on the budget and finance calendar. Given our conclusion tonight, I don't know that we need to meet next week. That would be our 8th week in a row. Are we done?
Can I say that I would like for us to talk about the financial policy next week, even if it's just a short meeting, because what I would like to have in the budget to council is some of those financial policies listed as the preamble into the budget. And I also, some of the story, quote unquote, about the budget on why we made some of the decisions we did, so that, you know, in posterity, somebody's not saying that crazy group of people, why would they do this, right? And so I want to leave a good bread trail. So if you would indulge me, maybe not next week, but the following week, but certainly next week would be better.
Yep. Can you get a copy out to shoot everybody a copy of that policy? I think everyone should have that. It was in last year's binder. Some of the backup supplement, but for our new members,
Yes.
maybe we can just do a fresh copy out to everybody.
Yes, and it's actually Financial Policy 103 and Financial Policy 105. And then I also want to talk about our plan for capital budgeting as well, because even though you guys think you're done, I plan for us to pick right back up in September
That's fine.
to really work on the capital plan and the equipment and repair and replacement plan.
No, we're done with one component. It just keeps going, right? And then we're going to finish up and start in the next cycle again. So no.
Yes.
Plus, I think we've got some financials to probably review.
Michael?
Susanna? Was the
Yes,
last
I'm sorry,
financial?
what were you? Oh, adding that to
We-
the calendar? Or no?
When
What,
the-
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Do we have any financials that need to be reviewed?
In terms of budget, you guys have everything so far that we need to review. We're going to go
Yeah.
over quarterly financial reports on the next meeting that we have.
Okay, that's what I was looking for. Okay, all right. Alfonso?
Yeah, I think that it's important when we will have the next sales report. If that will be before August 6th, then we can study that. So in that way, we will have a much better idea about the revenues. So do you know, Sylvia, when we will have the next report?
It probably will not come until between the 7th and the 10th.
So perhaps, Michael, will be much better to move that, not the 6th, maybe the 13th or another, not 1 week, 2 weeks, until we can see that report. And perhaps will be much better for us to have a better idea how that is working. If we are still with the 25% or we need to adjust to 30 or 35% than we discussed previously. Thank you.
Okay. I'm really struggling for us to try to go back and adjust. If the committee so deems it, then we will, but I think we're pretty
Well, it's not to adjust.
25%.
Sylvia, have you had any new information about closures and people that are not going to reopen in the shopping centers?
No, as a matter of fact, I talked to Cindy Lassard the other day, and so they're working very closely with their tenants. They're also renegotiating some of their contracts in hopes to reinvest some of those savings into the shopping center so they don't have to adjust rents. So they're being flexible.
Right. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so it
the
sounds
mayor
like
has her hand up.
Rose?
I think you're self-muted.
Hello?
No, I
Hello?
was waiting for the chairman.
No.
I was waiting for the chairman to recognize me.
Okay.
So Alfonso, to your question, this is the meeting where you guys are supposed to hand the budget off to me so that I can then work to get it presented and filed. My deadline to file is the 12th. I then have to turn around and publish a agenda on the 13th for the meeting on the 18th, which will be the first public hearing to the residents. So tonight, if you guys are going to circle around or do something more conservative, it would be much more helpful to myself and to Sylvia and Susanna if you do it tonight. I will say that hearing Mark Bruner say at least 2 meetings, maybe 3, that he didn't think 25% was enough, and then to see a motion, and it was either 2 or 3 of the members voted for 40%. I do question, and if you guys don't address it tonight, the first thing I'm going to have to question with Sylvia and the residents who are speaking to me right now, why aren't we doing more than 25%?
Well, we talked that to death at the last meeting. If the committee wants to revisit that issue, then it certainly can, or you can adjust that as the mayor, and so can the council.
And then the second is the subsidy. So that was brought up by somebody tonight. I can't remember who, And yes, I have heard from a handful of the residents who've been attending these meetings, and they question why we would be increasing any cost to residents at a time where residents are impacted just as much as anybody else based on COVID, especially in a time where we haven't reduced the budget as much as we know we can, and we haven't detailed out cost of services, which I don't need to revisit that. Sylvia did a good job of addressing that. It's very clear we don't have a good handle on our cost of services for many things throughout our operations. So I would encourage the group, before you adjourn tonight, to at least consider increasing, not to 40%, but you had at least 3 members who wanted more than 25%, and to also reconsider or better justify how you came to increasing the amount that we're going to expect residents to pay. Because as you, Mike Francis, you know, that's not going to be palatable to residents.
Well, you know what? Sometimes we've got to make tough decisions, and that's what we're trying to do here. You guys can change it, but this group voted and made a decision, so you certainly have the prerogative to override that. I didn't say it was going to be popular anymore, but the reality of it is we've got to make some changes, and so the idea was to slowly start to chip away at that. So anyway, I don't want to digress into that conversation. That's up to you guys. If the committee wants to revisit and open that issue,
Well,
we can certainly.
Okay.
You didn't make the motion. I made the motion. We put
Hold
in-
on, Dr. Browning. Dr. Browning, please hold on. Alfonso?
Yes. I think that at this moment I am a little warm, and I am moving according with my character and my passion. And I wasn't looking the schedule, and in the schedule, it's true that the mayor needs to have on August 12th this. So I apologize that I past that dates. And it's true, Rosie, today is the time that we need to provide that. But again, I think that when we made the 25%, we were working together. And I think I am so happy that we have a lot of good information and the passion to go point by point. This is the first time that I am so happy, and congratulations, Michael. I think that you leader this much better than previous years. So, and I am so happy that we have different members, Terry, now Mark, and everybody that they try to feed this committee. And I saw the mayor and all the members of the city council attending these meetings. So it's not only one committee, it's all the group and our leaders from the city. So thank you very much. And that's all. Have a good day.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we've done a great job given everything we've got to deal with. We made decisions, tough decisions, and we've broken into some ground that's going to be controversial, but you know, some of these things need to be looked at for years, and we've been kicking that can and kicking that can and kicking that can, and it's time for us to talk about it. And I'll honor whatever the majority of citizens want, but some of this stuff needs to be talked about. I'm sorry. Just how I feel. I think the committee made good decisions, and now it's up to you guys.
I'll make a motion that we make it 35%.
Let's see if that's on the agenda. Pull up the agenda. That says we can go back. All right, there's a motion to adjust income to 35%. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion is second. Anyone to speak in favor of the motion other than the firster and the seconder? Anyone to speak opposed? Mr. Cowan? John? Charles? Terry, you're muted.
Yeah, well, 35% is just a guesstimation. It's a stab in the dark. That's been one of the key weaknesses in this process, is never having a good fix on revenue. We estimated a revenue loss at 80% back in February, something like that, March, whenever that happened, to the end of the year, and that obviously was way off. I haven't heard anything that says 35% is right on or close to. I don't hear any support for it. I think one of the reasons we stated 25% was because if we raised that, it would drive the budget deficit deeper, which meant we had to go back through and cut more things when most of our time had already been used up, going through item by item, detail by detail. And a lot of expenses were reduced during that process. So I understand that people want to not estimate too much revenue, but that's something the council can do too if they get data that says, hey, look, this is not going to make 25%. It's going to be greater than that. So that my objection to it is not the number per se, but it's the method that we get there. It's almost like it's not quite pulling it out of the hat, but yeah, it is. That's all.
Well, remember, sales revenue sheet, we took May, June, April, and May, and we used those three, and the average of those three was 28%. And we said, okay, well, again, those were the only data points we had at the time, and then we settled in on the 25%. We talked about 40, and the committee said no.
I think
John?
it's interesting that some of the citizens that complained because we didn't reduce it enough, not because we reduced it too much. They did not think it was realistic based on the current circumstances.
John Blanca?
Yeah, just by way of my explanation is that this is July 2020. The budget that we're making is for October on to October of the following year. It's a long time. That I think right now we're in the dark days of COVID. If there is a treatment or a vaccine that comes up at the end of the year or in January or February, that still gives you a half year of conditions being a lot better. So even if you go down to 30-31% right now, next month, I think next year the average will be closer to 25%, because once you open up, there's all that pent up demand. That's my thought.
Several of the large studies on the COVID.
Dr. Brunner, just a moment. Mr. Young?
I agree with all the points that Terry and John have made. All of our dire predictions that we've made about budget revenues have been off, and not a little off, they've been way off. We need to base this on what data we have. And clearly we had a low in April that bounced back up to 20%. We need to see what's going to happen with both the things that are happening at the federal level and what happens with the sales revenue tax this next month. Yeah, so I'm definitely not in favor of changing what we've already gone over 3 times and had a majority of the committee vote to maintain.
Just to put some reality to this, the studies, very large studies that have been done on the vaccines in Brazil and Italy and some in Europe are showing that the antibodies do not last and that they may not slow the virus down at all. So it ain't over till it's over.
All right. Anyone else to speak on the motion? We'll do a
I would
roll
like
call.
to say something. Michael?
Charles?
Quick point. Something that, that has not been acknowledged and I think is significant. To use a 3-month average and come up with 28% is all fine and dandy, except the first month was just a partial month. And I know some people have said no, that people were starting to pull back well before March 24th when they declared the shelter in place. But we can't forget the fact that there was a stimulus that came into play, in the last month, the uptick, the bounce back, that was stimulus related. Anybody that follows Gerald Celente, he would call that monetary methadone. It's a drug. It drove people to spend more money because they had some money to spend. And where is all this magical demand going to come from if people don't have any money in their bank accounts? They're draining. People are suffering. People are, they're depending on this stimulus. So, I think I agree with with Dr. Browning. I think I think it's idealistic to think that things are going to bounce back in the near future. I believe that things are going to get worse. And I don't even believe in this virus. I think it's a hoax. All right. So that's where I'm at. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Mark?
So I think in general, I have a lot of concerns about the city's financial stability over the next few years, where there's so many unknowns. There's unknowns about how long the virus will last. There's unknowns about how many businesses will survive the city, or survive and go on or come back. At the same time, we're tasked with creating a budget for this next year. I think we've done our due diligence to come up with the cuts that get us closer to where we can manage this with a combination of, taking out expenses and dipping into reserves. But even then, we didn't get anywhere close to 25%, right? We're not equaling these things out. We're coming up with a deficit overall. We're having to use reserves, right? So we're even if we increase the amount of target revenues, realistically, that we aren't close to coming up with what our first goal is, right? In terms of just getting our expenses down. We've made shortcuts to get our reserves to funnel us down. So I'm not sure that it gets us anything to increase that revenue projection, right? Other than just another target saying we need to be cautious. I think that message needs to be loud and clear, to the council, the community, that this is a year of uncertainty ahead of us, possibly longer. We need to be very frugal about any expenses. I think this committee's done a great job getting us down to a level where we have, we're much more frugal than we have in the past. We cut so many things. And so from my perspective, raising it, if we are doing that with the purpose of trying to match, right, and really make further cuts, but we don't have time to do that right now. It would just be more of an additional awareness, campaign to try to get people aware that revenues are going to be volatile. And I agree with that statement. I'm just not sure that raising it at this point in the budget process is going to effectuate anything other than just sending a message, right? Because we're not going to be able to cut anything else, that's not going to reduce our targets. So I think earlier, the opportunity for us to do this would have been earlier on. And I think, like I said, there is a lot of uncertainty, and I don't necessarily share the full optimism that we are going to meet this 25%. I hope we do, and I hope that we can make strides to offset any business loss and things like that. But I think this committee's done a good job in terms of getting us down to a bare bones budget that we need to be in this time. So.
Well, we talked about it. We're going to start reviewing the financials every month, right? And so we're not going to just do quarterlies. We're going to do it every 30 days. We're going to be pouring through those numbers. And Sylvia said she's going to be right there with us. And if we have to go back to council and go, you know what, we missed it, or great, we've got it, we'll be there. I have no problem with going back and saying we missed the mark. And there's nothing magical about it. Like I said, we're doing the best we can with what we know. And I think we're making good decisions. Is there any conversation about this item motion? Anyone else?
May I speak?
Right, well,
this is Rudy Rosenberg.
we're ready to vote. Hurry.
If council decided to draw down the street fund to do the repairs on Home Depot Boulevard and Ernest Robley's Way, would that put us in the position where we would meet the balanced budget at a 35% reduction in revenues? I wonder. So if we took that off our expense sheet, how would we look? Just a statement.
Well,
Thank you.
I made that point at the last meeting. We would be 0-0 budgeting. So if you go to 35%, based on the numbers in this oversight budget summary, it would be, I think, $113,000. And if you take away the Home Depot and the other, as you suggested, we would be positive. And it was exactly at 25. But at 35, we'd be a little ahead.
Okay, anyone else? Let's go ahead and vote on the motion. We'll do a roll call. Alfonso? You're muted.
Only 25% no to the motion. Only 25% no to the motion.
Got it. Thank you. Charles?
Yes.
Got it. Thank you. Charles?
Yes.
Charles Young? Charles, you're muted. None? No? Okay. John? Charles Young?
No.
No.
Charles, you're muted. None? No? Okay. John?
No. No.
No, I'm breaking up.
No.
I'm breaking up. Okay, Dr. Browning?
Yes.
And I vote no. Dr. Browning?
Yes.
And I vote no. Okay, motion fails.
Michael, could you repeat what the motion was? Thank you.
The motion was to adjust our revenue from 25 to 35%. A 35% reduction in revenue. And that was seconded by Charles.
So my computer was breaking up a little bit. What was the determination of the vote?
The motion failed.
Okay, thank you.
What was the number?
Terry?
What was the number for and against?
Sylvia, did you keep the roll?
Yeah, the only two who voted in favor were you, Dr. Browning, and Mr. Goya.
You're muted, Mr. Cowan. You're muted. Terry?
I wanted to bring up a point that came up during the discussion about the repair of and replacement of the Home Depot road. And I have a concern about the effect of that on customer convenience and sales. It also is a large expense item, but I don't know if anybody has thought about that, because I think Home Depot is one of the places where we're getting good income, and I wouldn't want to do anything to discourage people from going there in the next year. That's all.
This is Rudy Rosengarten. Mr. Cowan, Councilmember Reeds and myself walked all of Home Depot Boulevard, could not see what the issue is and concern, and maybe we need someone from Public Works to walk it with us, but we walked all of it and saw nothing major that had to be corrected immediately. We also walked Ernest Ropley's and looked at the bridge. We saw all of the rocks that are moving. Even if we repair it, it will move again. Now, could we do some fix that could get us through until we have to totally redo the bridge? I think we could. So we need an engineer to look at that. Thank you.
That's something that we are.
I go to Home Depot every day buying stuff for my rentals and so forth to repair, and I cannot find any problem on the egress or ingress. And the engineer, I asked him the question if it needed to be done now, and he said no. Within 5 years or so, you might do it to prevent damage, but there's none there now.
Yep. So as part of our engineering and how we're handling the information that the engineers present to staff at the council, we're having them put together alt ads, meaning the council will make the decision if they would like to add or remove any particular component of a bid. And if there are much less expensive solutions, that's also going to be presented. And I think that was a little bit confusing on Sunset, because that's how I asked them to break it out, so we could cherry pick what components of the plan would work And so before we go any further with both of those projects, it is $833,000. We are going to make sure that we all fully understand the scope of work and if it can or can't be put off for 3-5 years. I fully get that we don't want to mess with Home Depot Boulevard because that is one of the streets that gets a lot of traffic in and out.
All right, committee members, anything else?
I think you made an excellent point then. If you blocked either side of that road, a lot of Home Depot's business was almost certainly go down to Lowe's because they wouldn't want to go in there and fight to get in, fight to get out, and then get the same stuff at Lowe's, albeit not as good a broad inventory. But I think that we'd be hurting Home Depot to repair that if it doesn't need it. And we probably ought to give them another ingress that's more convenient if we do.
All right. Anything else? Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Mr. Blanca. Motion by Mr. Blanca.
I'll second.
Charles, okay. Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Aye.
All in favor, say aye.
Thank you to the fire.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Good job. You guys are awesome.